fundamentally you're describing this really key divide between haves and have-nots, and it's based on citizenship, right? There's this division of haves and have-nots that really goes back to the citizenship you hold, which is an accident of birth, right? And that this is a system constructed. So, I mean, it sounds, it kind of ties in with this idea that when the EU created Schengen, and again, solidarity and freedom of movement, and isn't this great for Europeans? But at the same time that, on the external border, it created this kind of fortress Europe situation,
Exactly.
right? And so you're talking about the legal system that's set up to support this. So I suppose if we could get a bit more concrete, say an individual who has not yet reached Europe but is trying to reach Europe in order to claim asylum, right? Once they reach what they would like to claim asylum, what rights does this person have?
That's the whole problem. That person has some rights, including the right of non-refoulement. So when that person arrives, for instance, on the territory or is in the Mediterranean close to the EU territory, this person has a right not to be refoulé, so not to be sent back to where he or she comes from, and then to have his or her asylum claim being reviewed by Italy, by Greece, by one of the EU country. And here what's happening is that the EU put in place a system in order for this person not to be able to claim her rights, not to be able to have her rights recognized. How does that happen? There are different techniques put in place. So we have first Frontex. Frontex, which is the European Border and Coast Guard Agency. And it's interesting because this agency was first the European Anti-Fraud Office, and it became much later an agency which deals with borders. And this agency in 2004 had a budget of 6 billion, and now in 2023 it has a budget of 900 billion. So it grew and expanded tremendously. Now it assists member states in the return of third country national. It does a lot of things. It also assists them in controlling the borders. It has its own coast guards. So it has immense power in the way it can intervene in the control of borders. And there are many issues with these agencies that first, the problem of many hands. So there are proofs and there are clues that Frontex has observed and is even sometimes involved in what we call pushbacks, meaning that migrants are pushing back to the Libyan waters to make sure that they don't enter the EU. This is against international law. This is against the principle of non-refoulement.
So these are people who are in the sea.
Yeah,
they are in the boats they're in are being pushed back towards the North African coast, away from the European Mediterranean coast.
Exactly.
And this is illegal.
And this is illegal. But then what's happening in order for Frontex not being all accountable, in order for the EU not being all accountable, is, for instance, what we call the problem of many hands. There are many different actors involved. There is Frontex, there is, of course, the national border guards, the Italian, the Greek ones. There are also some private actors, and there is also the technology, so drones. So, for instance, Frontex, which has drones, will just see some migrants being in the Mediterranean and asking for help, hoping to reach the Italian coast or the Greek coast. And what Frontex will do is basically alert the Libyan Coast Guard to say, look, there are some people here who are in distress. Please, Libyan Coast Guard, save them. But what does it mean being saved by Libyan Coast Guard? And now it has been documented widely. These people are either put into slavery, either killed by the Libyan Coast Guard, or imprisoned in indecent conditions in prisons in Libya, where they are basically asked to pay a lot of money in order to be released. So they basic human rights, whether they are dying into the Mediterranean or whether they are brought back to the Libyan coast, these people are in a sense tortured and exposed to inhuman treatments. So this is what's happening. So this is the Frontex, the problem of many hands. It's impossible to identify who is responsible. So this is probably the first problem. The second problem is transparency. We don't know what's happening. We keep asking Frontex a lot of documents about what's happening there, what they are doing, about the activity, etc. But since we don't have the information, how can we basically go to court and say, look, Frontex is responsible. We don't have the information here. And the third problem is that it's almost impossible to bring Frontex in front of the court. So the court of the European Court of Justice is the one who is responsible when there is anything concerning Frontex, and it's impossible basically to have an effective remedies when this kind of things happened. And so we have a problem here of accountability. There is clear violation of EU law, but EU law is built, there is clear violation of human rights, but EU law is built as such as, like, it's never presented as a violation of EU law. So this is one of the big issues.
But so what you describe, and especially this total lack of accountability, lack of remedies, lack of transparency, this really clearly runs counter to the principle of the rule of law, right? Which is meant to be a core value of the European Union, right? The rule of law. So we have a real conflict here between stated values and practice. So, I mean, how does the European Union, I mean, we're probably familiar with this term of the EU as a normative power, right? It kind of stands by its values. Its values, that's what the European Union is. It's not a nation state. So how does the EU justify what seems to be such a blatant contradiction between stated values, especially the principle of the rule of law, and these practices you describe?
But the EU is behind this old system, and that's the issue, is that the EU builds this system especially in order to present it as there is no violation of the rule of law, as there is no violation of these basic rights. So I think this is one of the core issue of all of this, is that the EU put the blame, for instance, on migrants, on smugglers, but never ask itself whether it has its own responsibility. And the problem here is that I think that the Court of Justice is the high priest of lawlessness law. So the Court of Justice has also its own responsibility, in the sense that some cases were brought in front of the court, and the court, especially when we know this EU-Turkey deal, I don't know if you have heard about this EU-Turkey deal, basically, which was...
Maybe you could explain the basics of this EU-Turkey deal.
It's also part of the Lawlessless Law legal techniques, I would say, is that the EU kind of remove from international laws some international agreements in order to make sure that these agreements cannot be disputed. So it's the case, for instance, with readmission agreements. So readmission agreements are these agreements which are concluded on the one hand with the EU and on the other hand with a third country, to make sure that third country nationals who are undocumented in the EU are brought back to the
means
country.
They can be sent back to Turkey, for example.
Exactly, to Turkey, or to even African countries, Ethiopia, or even Afghanistan, etc. And this readmission agreement fall under the realm of international law. So these are agreements, if basically there are some issues with this agreement, you should be able to dispute them. But what the EU has done with some countries, including Ivory Coast, Guinea, Afghanistan, Gambia, is that it has concluded some readmission agreement with them under soft law, meaning that the EU take outside of the realm of international law these agreements, and then people who are actually affected by this agreement because they are returned to their country where they don't want to be cannot dispute these agreements. And so we see that the EU put all of this in a kind of shadow immigration lawless law system, and which is extremely problematic, I think. And coming to the EU-Turkey deal, we call it EU-Turkey deal, and I think we should continue to speak about the EU-Turkey deal. It was this deal between the EU on the one hand and Turkey on the other hand, following the so-called refugee law crisis in 2015, and the EU promised to pay Turkey $3 billion, and there was this one-to-one deal. It was so Turkey would send to the EU one good refugee, and the EU would send one bad refugee back to Turkey. And we learned about this deal just on the website of the council someday out of nowhere. We learned about this deal. So for even all the practitioners, for all the academics, this deal was concluded on the one hand by the EU, and on the other hand, and with Turkey on the other hand. And then some applicants went to the court asking and disputed this agreement, and the council said, no, I have nothing to do with this agreement. Basically, these are member states who concluded this agreement, not the EU. And the Court of Justice upholds this argument and say, indeed, the EU has nothing to do with this agreement. These are member states. So this is is member states' problem. So it's basically impossible to bring in front of the Court of Justice this kind of deeply problematic agreement which violates international law and basic human rights and EU law as well.
Mm-hmm. So really what you're describing is a really systematic, concerted effort to render asylum seekers legally invisible. Invisible from the legal system.
Not only asylum seekers, migrants in general.
Migrants
even,
in general.
Yeah.